we go. Yeah, cool. I did it. Okay. So this is the logo for Coulomb Cloud. So it's just a group of us who do electrical engineering who started up a group to essentially just help with the academic part of electrical engineering, because a lot of us are finding it very difficult, and a group of us who are friends found it was much easier to go through difficult subjects if we were able to do it together. And obviously Learning Squared is the title of the talk today. I'll just get us started. Actually, I'll just introduce myself properly. I'm Alex Hiller, and I'm studying electrical engineering here at UTS, and I'm third year this year.
Yep. I'm Pratiksha Chutar. I do electrical engineering and creative intelligence and innovation as a double. I'm also in my third year this year.
Yeah, so this is the first equation you're probably going to have seen at UTS. If you're doing engineering, everyone's doing engineering. Just raise your hand if you're doing engineering. Yeah, okay. So there might be some IT people in here, but there we go. So first equation. So we've got here that frustration is proportional to the difference between expectations and reality. Right? This is just a bit of something that I've noticed over time, that when you expect one thing and then the other thing happens, and you just become frustrated by that. It might not actually be that one's objectively worse than the other, but because you'd expected it to be one way, and then now it's not that way, you weren't told that, it can be quite frustrating. So I just wanted to set the expectation for you guys with this talk of what learning at UTS and learning at university is about. And obviously we have this, your plan might be just to get to the finish line, finish your degree, sweet, get a job, but actually on the way you're going to have all these pitfalls and all this stuff that you're going to have to deal with. So keep that in mind. Okay, so setting expectations. This is what we're going to do. We're going to start off with a how, so just a bit of a practical guide, like what you should do, right? So for the pragmatists amongst you, you'll be able to just go, okay, X, Y, Z. But then also for the philosophers among you, we have like the why you should do that. Okay, so maybe it wasn't quite convincing, and we can give you some reasons about maybe why you should do that. And then if it's still not convinced, you can ask questions. Obviously, on if you press again, Slido, right? So you can just go there and just ask questions all the way throughout. You can also upvote them, right? Like on Reddit. So you can upvote them, and then the top ones will go to the top and be more likely to ask. So if you can see ones on there that you like, even if you can't think of one, vote them up. Okay? Cool. So I'll just start us off with the how. Okay. Practical guide. So, the content in your courses are given in your subject outlines, right? And they'll say, you have to learn X, Y, Z. And people get into their subjects, and then they get to like halfway through, and they go, why didn't they teach me that properly? Why didn't they teach me this? Why didn't they teach me that? Well, the reality is that they're not going to serve the content up to you on a platter. They're not going to deliver it exactly the way that probably best suits you. So you're going to have to learn to teach yourself stuff from textbooks and the internet. Right? Now, this is about becoming an independent learner. You could argue that it's about the university not doing its job, which a lot of people make that argument, but I kind of disagree. I think at the end of your degree, you should make the university redundant to you in a certain way. In that, if you want to learn something, you can hire a book out, and you can just teach yourself, and set yourself up with the right resources to learn something. That's what you're here to do. And if you think about it, if you're all going to become engineers, what happens when you work on a project out in the field, and it involves some sort of circuit and topology that you haven't used before, or some sort of quantitative technique that you haven't learned? What's going to happen? You're going to go back to university and ask them to teach it to you after you've left? You're going to actually have to pick up a textbook instead and say, okay, I need to do this thing. What is it? How do I do it? Right? So it's best to probably get in the habit of doing that on the way. And it's also quite fulfilling to be able to, and quite empowering to be able to do that yourself. The next part. So this is my current model of learning, okay? People who've done some engineering classes might laugh when they see this, because this is actually what's called a block diagram, okay? So on the left you have your input, so your previous understanding, right? And then here you're doing most of your work, where you're thinking about something, or you're doing problems, or sometimes you just have like a sudden realization, like serendipity, okay? And you just get it. And then you have your current understanding, okay? But sometimes that current understanding is not enough. You need to improve that. So what you do is you have this feedback loop. And in that feedback loop, you consult your lecturers. You read the textbook. You examine your mistakes, so doing a problem and then going, that wasn't correct. Why wasn't that correct? Then you have assessments, which is someone else looking at your mistakes and saying, it's not correct because of this, right? And then you have the internet, right? Where it could be an article online, it could be a research paper, it could be a YouTube tutorial, right? Finding those resources yourself. And then feeding that back in, doing some more thinking, doing some more problems, and then getting your understanding up to scratch. Yeah?
Cool.
Okay.
So UTS adopts a bit of a flipped learning practice, really different, pretty much completely opposite to what you do in high school. Class time at UTS is more about how you can get feedback on your mistakes or how you can develop your understanding more. So usually what happens here is that you have preparation activities before your class, and that it constitutes of like lecture notes, so reading them before the actual lecture, doing pre-work, attempting the tutorial questions before you get to the tutorial. So that's all preparation work, and it's expected of you, because when you do get to class, class time is just the lecturer addressing your questions and then going through examples. Lecturers will not explain or will not teach you new content. They kind of expect that you've read it all, and all they're going to do is just answer your questions and go through some examples for you. So that's where doing your pre-work is really crucial, guys. So if you don't do your pre-work, you kind of go into a lecture or a tutorial and they're applying the theory straight away and you don't even know what the theory is. Don't worry, we've all felt it, so it's really common. Just know that it is expected of you to do your pre-work. And then you have your out of class, which is revision after the lecture, and that's either online quizzes or lab post work, and it's taking notes. That everyone does at their own pace. I highly recommend don't leave them till the night before the final exam, because I've done it and it does not work. Like, you learn so much throughout the 12 weeks that you're at during the semester. It's not possible. You're not going to feel well while you're making all those notes the night before your exam. So do them weekly or bi-weekly, whatever works for you guys, but get at it, because it does help a lot. So adding to that, you do have to be very proactive with your studying. Always got to be one step ahead of the lecturer. So if you're, for example, in your subject outline, it says, next week in this subject, we're going to learn about vector calculus. You do not wait till next week to learn about vector calculus. You should probably go to your lecture notes or whatever the lecturer has provided you, read them before you get to the lecture, and then you will basically, they'll address your understanding even more. But you do have to be one step ahead of lecturers, tutors. And so adding to that, experiment ways of how you learn. Everyone learns very differently. You probably already know how you learn from, the HSC, probably know what works for you or what doesn't, or maybe you have no idea how you learn, and that's great. Just figure it out when you're at university. So as an example, I'm someone who likes to learn everything on my own, like learn the theory, but then we'll, as a group, probably practice past papers or do some tutorial questions together, because if I don't get something, I get really mad and I need someone to help explain that to me. So it's kind of like, just know what works for you. Are you a study group kind of person? Are you a alone time with music, without music? Whatever works with you. Also, I can't cram. So before the final exam, if I cram everything, it's probably in my head for about 5 hours and then it's out again. That doesn't really help with university, because in university you're learning mathematical modeling 1 in first semester, you're learning mathematical modeling 2 in second semester. So if you've crammed all of Math Mod 1 and then you forget it, and then you get to Math Mod 2 and you're probably in a bit of a pickle, because you're going to have to learn everything that you learnt last subject. So just try not to cram. And also, I don't know how many of you guys do this, but my top tip of trying to think that I know I'm studying, but I just kind of procrastinate, is like Googling top 10 study tips. So if you guys do that, try them out. Like, some of them have worked for me, and then it kind of gets me more motivated as well, but it can be a bit of procrastination as well. So within limits.
Yeah, moderation.
Yeah.
So just on that, experimenting with the ways you learn, really be honest with yourself as well. It took me a while to admit the fact that although I love being around people while you're trying to learn something new is not always the best way to do it. So I have to spend about 50% of my time by myself, and although I don't really prefer that, that's what I need to do in order to actually understand what I'm doing. I can't sit there with someone watching me and read a textbook and get something. It doesn't work. I have to be by myself, but then clarifying with other people, being with other people to clarify on something works, right? So it's about realizing what does and does not work, and sometimes it's not black and white. And like I can do problems with music, like doing problems that I understand the theory behind, but I can't read a textbook listening to music. So yeah, realizing those things along the way, you have to really experiment that, and you might have just winged it through the HSC and just like done whatever and like stick the landing. But that might not work at university just because the workload is a bit heavier. Another thing is, when you're actually studying, you need to focus, okay? It's pretty hard in a distracted age where you have your mobile phone on you at all times. Airplane mode is a blessing, okay? But multitasking is the enemy, okay? People who multitask generally think they're much more productive than they actually are, okay? So what I would say is, if you are doubtful of this, right? So this guy, Cal Newport, wrote a book called Deep Work, which is about it's an economic argument about the ability to focus for long periods of time and why you should develop it. So it's that, what is valued in our economy? Well, one, it's that you can develop deep and complex skills and apply them quickly and well, right? And it's like, okay, well, how do I learn complex skills and apply them well? It's like, be able to focus for long periods of time and be able to absorb things quickly. Well, how do I do that? It's like, practice focusing for long periods of time. How do you practice for focusing for long periods of time? You put down your phone when you study. You set aside a block of time to do something, and you only do that in that period of time. It's an invaluable skill, and it actually takes a lot more effort than it seems like at face value. Okay? Yeah. And the last little bit on the how is the Pareto Principle. Okay? So the Pareto Principle is that 80% of the progress comes from about 20% of the work. And I want you guys to, for tutorial problems, apply this to that, right? And that's that it will be difficult to do a tutorial problem for content that you haven't yet had a lecture on. But if you read the lecture notes first and then attempt the tutorial problem before going, you'll then know what you don't know, okay? And it will be painful because you'll suck at it at first, and you probably won't get the question right, but you'll know what you don't know. And instead, if you had just rocked up and you were worried about, oh, I wasn't going to get it right, I wasn't going to get it perfect first try, and that might, that might hurt. It's like, well, to go to the tutorial, not know what you don't know, spend the entire hour catching up on what you're supposed to have already done, and then leave and go, oh, I wish I could ask what this is, and then having to send an email, maybe not getting a response, having to spend extra time after that. You're wasting your own time in doing that, and you're actually going to get a lot more value from being imperfect at the beginning. Yeah? Okay, so let's go to the why, the philosophical guide. Why should you do any of what we just told you?
All right, so just to add a bit of credibility to what we're all saying, I don't know if you know the man up there. I owe half my degree to him. He's Sal Khan from Khan Academy, makes some amazing math videos. Highly suggest you go check him out. But basically, he made a TED Talk about comparing how to build a house to getting through a degree or basically learning anything. So by the end of this, by the end of your university life, you probably want a degree, you want to make yourself a little bit employable, have a good understanding of what you have learned over these, 4 or 5 years. We can make that analogy with building a house. So by the end, you want a strong structure. So when you do build a house at the start, you have your foundations. So far, your foundations are what you've learned throughout high school, maybe even after that, basically basic math, depending on what level of math you did for the HSC, some equations or differentiation. All of this forms your foundation. And in university, we're just going to build up on that. And each semester is kind of like your new level. You do need to have a strong structure. So what that means is you need to have a good understanding of per semester what you're doing. Because if you start having cracks in your understanding, the whole understanding house kind of shakes and isn't as strong. And by that, I mean being really honest with yourself and knowing what you do and don't understand per semester. Because, for example, like math, it is a cumulative thing. It grows. You start off knowing your numbers, the basic number line, then you get into algebra, then you get into differentiation, integration, all of that. That all builds up. So if you don't have a good understanding at the bottom, you're going to start getting really frustrated at the top. If you if you start seeing cracks, you're going to start losing passion. And this has happened to a few people where I've had a friend who didn't really learn integration properly or didn't understand it properly or differentiation and did an engineering degree because, like he wanted to be an engineer, but because he just didn't like that one bit or didn't understand it well enough, he just got frustrated throughout the whole degree because it's just going to keep popping up again and again. So try your best to understand it completely because it's all going to build up and you want to have a complete understanding by the time you get, by the time you've graduated. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just on that, if you build up the foundation with those cracks in it, like Pratisha was talking about, you get this thing that people call Swiss cheese knowledge, right? So like on the outside of a Swiss cheese, what's it called?
Surface?
So, yeah, the surface of the Swiss cheese. It looks fine, like with the the red wax on it, but when you cut it, there's all holes on the inside. And so you don't want it to be like that, right? You want to actually make sure that you master one thing and move on to the next thing, so that you're more likely to be able to build up on that further up there.
Yeah.
Okay, so the meaning to be found in difficult work. So Pratisha was talking about like her friend that had dropped out because he couldn't sort of keep up with what was happening because he didn't have that fundamental understanding of something that he was using on a regular basis, right? You could sort of imagine that that's being so surrounded by so many things you don't know that it's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming to anyone, okay? But the meaning can be found in that, who's ever learned something and then you've just gone, oh, that explains that thing that I see every day, and that's just like incredibly cool. That is extremely fulfilling. And to be on the edge of what you currently know and what you don't know, and to be extending that constantly, is an extremely fulfilling thing to do. So although everyone will constantly tell you, like you said, oh, I study engineering, and they go, that must be hard. And it's like, well, what's the point of doing something if it's not difficult to you? Okay, so people often think about, my dream is in 10 years to be on an island sipping cocktails, right? And to do that. And it's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense and that's probably fun, but if and only if that's contrasted with you doing difficult and meaningful work on a regular basis, and then that is the interim, right? Who's got bored over the break? Who got bored and wanted to learn something? And yeah, exactly, right? Like, to have a holiday is good only in contrast to doing something that's meaningful to you. And this can be the thing that's meaningful to you if you put enough effort into it and if you take it seriously enough. Another thing is the compound interest of getting a bit better every day. So I have the bad habit, which I can't seem to break, of constantly making to-do lists that are too long for the day, and only getting through like 1 or 2 things, and I have 5 things to do. And I always put myself down like, oh man, I wish I got through all 5 things. And it's actually like, well, maybe I got 1% better today, and I wanted to get 3% better. But the reality is that if I get 1% better again tomorrow, I'm getting 1% on that 101%. And then if you do that again the next day, and again the next day, you're constantly improving. So slow progress is still good progress, okay? You've got to be patient with trying hard and learning things and doing assessments and chipping away at it. It's going to take some time. But I'm barely recognizable to the person that started engineering 2 years ago, right? It's something that each and every day you can't notice the difference, but 2 years down the line you're like, oh wow, like I know all these things now that I could never have imagined that I could understand before. So keep that in mind if you ever get frustrated about like the lack of progress over a short amount of time. And then, okay, just the last thing on the why. Okay, so grades are correlated with understanding, but they're not the same thing. Okay, so as grades increase, your understanding tends to increase. But see how like the data points sort of shotgun out a little bit? They sort of like veer away from the line as you increase up the line. So at a certain point, like if someone gets a credit or something, you sort of think, yeah, they probably passed the subject, they understand enough about it. But when it gets up to the upper regions of a subject, it tends to be that someone who got a high distinction may know less than someone who got a distinction, okay? And I know that what probably got you to university in the first place was being very like, I want this, I want to do well. That's probably what got you here. But I would urge you not to play the game too much and focus on getting that 85, but instead to focus on getting that understanding, because otherwise you're going to have that poor foundation that Pratisha was talking about. Focus on being, if you get 5 or 10% less just because you spent more time going over something that you thought was important and you didn't understand and you wanted to understand it better, that's okay. That's a good thing to do, okay? people use grades to siphon you into a graduate program or put you into grad school, like research, because it's an indicator of what you know. It's not everything. That's why most grad programs have a credit average entrance cutoff, right? Because anything above that, it begins to become, it's not completely correlated with how much you know or how good you are. And like your grade, your percentage points, only makes sense as a perfect explainer of your understanding if and only if the assessment was perfect. Assessments can't be perfect. Assessments are in and of themselves written by other human beings who don't know your best aptitudes. What if it's best for you to explain your understanding in a verbal manner, but you got examined on paper, right? What if you're prone to common algebraic mistakes, but you completely understand convolution integration? It's just something that you have to keep in mind when you're going through your degree, right? Focus on the understanding, not on the grade. Obviously, you want to pass everything and get through to the end, but yeah, keep that in mind. This guy, Rich, sorry, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add like a personal experience to that. So I learned something first semester, got through the subject with a really high mark, didn't know one part of it, and it kept coming up, and now I've gone to the point where if I don't learn it, I probably will fail another subject, like I probably will fail a subject. So just be really honest with yourself. Even if you are getting great marks, just know that, okay, there are some things that you probably still don't know from that topic, and it might pop up again later on. So just be quite honest with yourself, that's all.
And this guy here, this is Richard Feynman. If you ever want some physics inspiration, he's the dude to go to. Nobel Prize winner in theoretical physics. The reason he's there is that he has this saying, just to echo what Pratisha was saying, in that he says, the number one rule is not to fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. So you've got to be honest with what you do and don't know, and be willing to bridge that gap in between semesters when it comes up to the next part where maybe you didn't learn that properly. It's not the worst thing in the world if you didn't learn something, by the way, in a course, and you have to then bridge it. That's fine. Everyone has to do that. And everyone has to go back to stuff and relearn it. That's fine too. But being honest about that is the important part. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now we're going to take a 2-minute break. And you are going to talk to the person next to you and think about what questions you want to ask, what doesn't make sense, what you think you're skeptical about, and put it on Slido. And then we're going to have some amazing students over here come up the front and answer your questions. Okay? So turn to the person next to you, submit some questions, vote up another question, and we'll be right back.
Please don't leave.
UTS is moving to an open book examination policy. Now, Justine, what does that mean for people as learners at UTS?
Well, what a great question, Alex. I'm really glad you asked. So you're quite right, UTS is moving towards an open book exam policy. Now, many of you will have just done HSC and will think that that's the best thing ever. Don't be duped into thinking it is the best thing ever. The single tip I can give you about open book exams, and this is based on research, is study for an exam as if it is a closed book exam. The reason we're going to open book exams is because we want you to learn and master things, but not be in an exam situation where you're highly stressed about recalling something. Exams are not designed to just recall knowledge. It's about application. You will not be able to do an open book exam if you haven't mastered the material. It's not an opportunity to learn it in the exam and go, oh, this is sweet. I've got the book there. I've got all my notes. All I have to do is look it up and the answer will be there. That just won't work. In fact, students will be more likely to fail in open book exams if they approach study in that way. So the single biggest tip about open book exams, and that goes for the panel as well, because this will be new for you, is to study as if it will be a closed book exam. So make notes. The note-making activity is part of the study. And then it just takes the pressure off to remember stuff, but it won't help you know it or understand it. And over to other questions.
Cool. So...
Right. Oh, I now get to ask one, is that right?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. Okay, collaboration is one requirement in tutorials. What's the best way to get a good result in teamwork?
I think one of the big advantages of teamwork is that
Put the mic up closer.
you've got a spread of knowledge. So like you've probably realised from what we've been saying so far is there's a huge amount of gaps in our knowledge. You can't learn absolutely everything. So in a team environment, you can play to everyone's strengths. So if you're doing a group project or you're in a tutorial doing that kind of thing, try and play to people's strengths. If you've got someone who's a great public speaker, get them to do the presentation for the group work. If you've got someone who's very mathematically minded, get them to do the calculations, that kind of thing. So my big advice would be try and figure out what and play to everyone's strengths in the group to get the best out of your group experience.
I'd say, like with all group projects, there's going to be people that don't want to do much, and it's going to be really frustrating. You're going to have to like force people to do things, they don't want to do it. But in the end, a lot of the group projects are marked individually. Also, you have, like I like, because I personally like taking control of groups. I like to be like in control of everything. You have to know when to let that go, to let other people do things, because they can really bring things that are valuable to your group, and it'll help you do a lot better than you think you would have otherwise.
I can add there that the studio projects that we ran over summer, students created much grander things in a group than they could have created individually. So, yeah, point to that. Typically, how many hours of study is expected on a daily basis?
Probably varies. I can only really muster maybe 4 good hours of study outside class a day. Otherwise, you just burn out a bit. But how about you guys?
It's hard to give a number of hours because I don't time how much I study. I study when I need to, which can be good and bad in ways. I guess something that I want to do more is try and prepare myself more for exams and try not to leave assignments to the last minute. So yeah, it's just a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, more than timing it, I think you need to time like the content that you're covering in the time that you do study. So making sure that you do cover all relevant content during your study, and making sure that any time that you do dedicate to studying is valuable.
A lot of the times lecturers will give you a number at the start of a semester. That's happened to me. Don't fall for it. If you it's an aim, but don't beat yourself up if you don't get to that number of hours per week, because one lecturer just gave an outrageous amount. It was 15 hours a week for that one subject. I was like, I do 4 subjects, how is that possible? But so keep it as an indicator, but you obviously, again, you know best of how you study, so don't beat yourself up if you don't meet that 15 hours per week for that one subject, that's fine.
Another thing I'd add is it's definitely quality over quantity. So if you sit down at the start of the week and think, yeah, great, I'm going to hit 20 hours this week, just because you hit that 20 hours doesn't mean you did 20 hours of effective work. Yeah, if I sit down, put my phone in another room, don't talk to anyone, just do an hour of solid work, that's 10 times more effective than if I go and do group study where we're chatting half the time I'm checking my phone, I'm not really getting into it deep enough. So I don't really like the question of how long should you study for, but just focus on how well you study. So really focus on making, when you sit down, you could even just do half an hour, but really get into it. Make it the sole thing that you do. Because if you get more of those quality hours done, you don't really have to do that much time on it. And just one final thing I'll mention is that repetition is key. So it is far, far, far better to do half an hour each day than just do 3 or 6 hours on Sunday. The amount of knowledge you lose grows the further apart your sessions are. So if you do a session every Sunday, you're going to spend half the session just catching up on what you've forgotten since the week. But if you do something every single day, your knowledge transfers across quite easily and you don't have to be catching up from the last session.
Yeah. I think Alex's point earlier in his presentation about focus is critical, and there's now brain science to support that multitasking is a fallacy unless it's an automated response, like driving. Sometimes you drive and you can't remember how you got from one place to the next because you're on autopilot. Did you want to ask about that?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the multitasking. So there was a session earlier in the orientation last week or the week before, where they were giving us a quick example about multitasking. So if you would count from, if you would order from A to J and then count from 1 to 10, you would do it easily, probably in 10 seconds or so. But if you want to go, want to mix it up, so start with A1, B2, C3, you would be stopping just by J or something, and then you'll take about half a minute or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. The harder the task is, the less you can afford to multitask. And the other point to add to that is about what we call presence, so which is focus. You can make a conscious decision to be present in the class. It's what I would say, you've turned up, so you might as well bring yourself along, which means if you're going to go to class, make a conscious decision to bring yourself to that moment. And understand that every time you check your phone or your computer in a tutorial or a workshop, you're making a decision to leave that moment. And that's okay, we all do it, but just be conscious of it and be able to bring yourself back to it. There's a few questions in the list here about motivation and turning up. So the question for the panel is, how important is it to turn up to tutorials if I can do all of this learning elsewhere?
I think the only time that I've known someone to get through the subject without turning up to the tutorials, they either didn't understand the content very well or they were repeating the subject. So it doesn't really bode well if someone says that they don't go to the tutorials, right? I'm very skeptical of that working out in the long run.
Like you could learn most of it on your own and then not show up to tutorials, lectures, but what the lecturers do is they provide insight from their experience as well, and they provide insight about, like, just more in-depth insight. They probably explain it in a little different way. There's information that they have that probably you won't be able to find easily in a textbook or in tutorials. So I highly suggest do go to them. You may feel like a lot of it might be a bit of repetition because you have learnt some of it, but just the fact that you can ask a question and get immediate feedback is really valuable. So I highly, I feel like you really should attend.
In terms of motivation, I know that especially for engineering, our timetables are so spread across. So some days you might only have one tube in a day, and so like coming all the way to uni might not seem worth it. But what I find really useful is attending uni and then studying in a uni environment on my own as well. So making the most of that trek to uni, attending that tutorial, and then going and like sitting in a library, sitting in the feed room that we have upstairs, and just using this environment to study really well.
I think especially with tutorials, you should go. Like I've had a friend who didn't go to tutorials and she failed the subject. Because she didn't go to tutorials, she didn't realise, she forgot there was a final exam in one of the tutorials, and so she missed the final exam, which is worth about 40%, and so she failed the subject. So, and like, especially in tutorials, it's where you're going to practice. It's where you're going to practice your knowledge, practice your skills, and that's actually how you're going to learn the skills you need to further go on with your subjects and to get better and such. Yeah.
A tutorial is actually a good way to actually bookmark and calibrate with the rest of the people in the subject too, to go, okay, am I like up to speed with everyone else? Is everyone else on the same page as me right now? It's a good way to gauge that. So it's a good feedback mechanism there as well, to be like, okay, am I getting it enough? Or am I falling behind? Or am I actually ahead? And it also prompts you to think about that subject, and like if you go, oh, I have to go in today for X subject, and you go, oh, actually, what are the assessments for X again? Oh, when's that coming up? And so it prompts you to think about it. So I would always also say that's an advantage.
Yeah, I'd also say it's a lot of value. So what you get in a tutorial for say an hour could be what takes you like 5 hours by yourself. Like, if you think you're not going to turn up to a tutorial, you have to be honest with yourself. What don't you know? What do you know? And sometimes, yeah, just going to the tutorial can help you out, work that out.
Okay, so that's about tutorials. There's a question here about getting to 8 a.m. lectures.
Don't bother. if you're not, like, if you're hungover, you're not taking it seriously, I wouldn't bother.
Okay, so a lot of the times at the start of your degree, you have a lot of sessions for one subject, so you can build your timetable knowing, you know, are you an early riser or are you not an early riser? All of my subjects last semester were after 11 because I don't get up. So I just made it that way because I knew that way I will actually come to uni. So if you don't have a choice, sucks to be you, but if you do, then like try to work with that, with what you know and what works well.
Get a coffee before class.
Mm-hmm.
If you, like, I would say if you're not going to make the most of the opportunity, it's probably not worth going, like what Nick said. But I would also say that you're perfectly capable of training yourself to make advantage of the opportunity, in that you could get up early, get in and reward yourself with a coffee. You could like positively reinforce that behavior and then over time get used to it. Because, I mean, you could just consider it a challenge just to see like how it works. And, you know, the whole university experience is a bit of an experiment in figuring out how it is you're going to get through all this. And, you know, an 8 a.m. rise is pretty easy, or getting into somewhere by 8 a.m. is pretty easy. But if you're doing civil engineering, you guys work on job sites and have to be in at like 6 a.m. So maybe you should start practicing.
Sorry, I will just make the point that I was going through the questions earlier and I saw how do you get yourself to an 8 a.m. class if you're hungover? So I was just saying don't bother in relation to that, because if you're not motivated enough to be sober for class, don't bother.
And I think it speaks to that, both of those things. So if you're going to turn up but not bring yourself along, then maybe don't turn up. I can't believe I just said that, and it's on film. Edit that bit out when you get to that. Okay, there's a question here about textbooks. Do the recommended textbooks really hold strong relevance to all coursework and what you need to learn?
I'll start with saying some textbooks are really useful. Some...
But how will you know which is which?
I generally wait...
Ask someone in a further along year about whether that textbook is handy. They'll be very quick to give you advice about that textbook's amazing, or I can't remember that textbook. So if they can't remember that textbook, it probably wasn't that helpful, okay? But in saying that, textbooks objectively as an item are invaluable, right? Someone has taken the time to compile a whole bunch of technical information into one book in one place with examples so that you can understand it. Maybe that textbook that prescribed to you doesn't work, but just look up another one with the same topic and see if that works for you, okay? So it's not just about, like, do I buy the textbook, do I not buy the textbook? It's like, textbooks work, just find the right one, perhaps?
I think as well, if you're unsure if you need the textbook, you can borrow it from the library, maybe for the first couple weeks, and then you can, I guess, gauge, you know, do I really need it? Because for some subjects, I've definitely needed the textbook, others maybe not so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay, maybe just a couple more questions. What is it, and just chatting with some people earlier, you know what's worked for you to this point, you know what your weak points are in terms of learning and what you're susceptible to doing and what you're really good at. But question for the panel, what is the most difficult thing you've discovered about the way you learn?
The most difficult thing for me is that once semester's finished, I forget a lot. So that's something I'm going to struggle with this semester, is that, because I do IT and I learned programming at the end of my first year, and I've forgotten, I guess, a lot of the patterns and this way to structure code. And now I'm coming into this year, I'm doing a subject where I have to build an application, and people have told me this subject's a lot harder. There's not as much learning. And so now I'm like, So that's what I struggle with the most. And so now I know I need to really, in the next few weeks, really try and relearn a lot of the stuff that I've forgotten, so I will not fall behind and I will not struggle in this subject coming up.
So is this in regards to just learning? I'm a mad procrastinator, so I've learnt that I can trick myself into thinking I'm studying by making to-do lists and by organising my calendar and by doing all this stuff that you do before you study and not actually studying. I feel like I've done heaps of work. So just coming to terms with that and being like, no, you're not getting anything done. So try, just be honest with yourself. That's the main thing. And once you've noticed it, you can start fixing it.
I think personally, like I said it in the talk, right? I like being around people and studying with people, but I think the hardest thing was to admit actually it's not the best thing for me to be around people when I'm learning something new, and like being honest with yourself and going, yeah, it's going to suck studying by myself, but I'm just going to go to the library, sit down for a couple of hours, and then that'll be that.
Sometimes you just gotta chill. Like, I spend too much time trying to get something that probably won't even come up. And yeah, it's good to get it eventually, but sometimes you just gotta let go of that instead of wasting so much time on one thing. And I think that's what, I don't know, the most big one is like learning when to chill.
Learning what to prioritize. So I think when I started out at uni, I thought, all right, I'll make studying my number one priority. I'll get everything done later once I've figured studying out. And you very quickly realise that everything else going on in your life affects how you study, especially sleep and exercise. I know I'm really going to sound like your parents giving you this advice, but really prioritise your health and then realise that your study comes from that. And that includes like your social and your mental health as well. Make sure you're spending plenty of time with friends. Don't forego your entire social life just to make sure you get your study done, because you'll be far more effective if you've got a life outside of study as well.
And he's 50. That's how well he looks after his health there. So that's, yeah, good. Panel laughed, thanks. Wrap it up.
Okay, yeah. I'll just do a quick shameless plug. So Cool on Cloud, the group, we're going to be upstairs in the FEIT Learning Precinct. Okay, we're running a thing called an install party. You need software for some subjects. Okay, is anyone doing software engineering? Yeah. Okay. Is anyone doing mechanical engineering? Yep. Okay. Electrical engineering? Yep. Cool. Any engineering, you're going to come up with like certain kinds of software. We have software that we can help you install on your computer, or just give you the link to all the installers. And there's also food. So if you want to come upstairs and also meet people who are doing engineering in their later years, and you can ask them questions, feel free. We'd love to meet you, and we hope to see you there. And actually, just like thanks for coming, and thanks for participating, and I'm sure we'll see you around uni. And a big thanks to our panel, by the way. Can you give them a big clap for me? Because they volunteered their time. And thanks to Justine and B also as well for letting us run this. So thank you. Oh yeah, Learning Precinct is on level 5. Level 5 at the end of the corridor, room 300.